into it. All right, I'm John Sweeting. I'm the Chief Customer Officer with ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers. We're here at scale. Invitation, Owen DeLong invited us here several years ago, and we came for a while, and then with the pandemic, we didn't make it for a few years, and then we were invited back last year, and we're here again. We get a lot of interest at our booth about sole proprietorship and individuals. How can individuals get their own IP addresses and autonomous system numbers? And we answer those questions on, you know, if you're a sole proprietor, you really need to be a sole proprietor. You really need to have a business network connection at least. You can have it out of your home. We don't care as long as you've got a connection to somebody on the internet that you, if you want an AS number, you have to be doing BGP with them. And then you can get your own block of V6/48 we normally give to end users in homes. And along with V6, you can also apply for a /24 of special space that we call 410 space because it's section 410 out of our number resource policy manual that tells you can get 1/24 to help you to deploy IPv6. Okay, I'm going to start out with some organizational updates. I'm going to turn it over to John Worley here. He's our senior technical architect, does a lot of the, well, most of the technical stuff. He's also knows our database backwards and forwards, the whole architecture of it. And any information I want, I go to him and say, hey, I need to know this, this, and this. And he goes into Meta, sets up the query, and he comes back with the information, and then we iterate till we get the right numbers we're looking for. Okay, so there's one thing, just real quick changes with ARIN. As of January 1st this year, we have done away with ASN. The ASN fees, you used to have to pay $550 for each and every ASN that you requested from ARIN and were approved for. That's no longer there. We kind of harmonized the process on that. We've transitioned ASN only holders into, well, just ASNs into the registration services plan. So our services, our registration services plan is based on either the number of IPv4 addresses you hold aggregated, the number of IPv6 addresses you hold aggregated, or now the number of AS numbers you hold. And we did the, we based the ASN number fee number on the fact that with the addresses, it's every time you get 4 times the amount of address space, you double the fees. So we did the same thing with ASN. So if you have 0 to 3 ASNs, you're a 3x small and you pay $250 a year. If you have 4 to 15 ASNs, you're considered a 2x small and you pay $500 a year. Another advantage to the ASN only holders is they became service members, which makes them eligible to become general members, which makes them eligible to vote in the ARIN elections for our Board of Trustees and also for our Advisory Council. And as I said earlier, we removed the $550 ASN issuance fee. The only time you'll pay an issuance fee for ASNs is if it's your very first number resource that you get from ARIN, and then it's a $250 fee. So if you came in and got an AS number, you'd pay $250. If you then got V6, you would pay nothing until the next year. And if you got V4, you would still pay nothing during that whole year. And then your next year's annual fee would be based on the aggregate number of addresses, whichever one is the most fee. So if you had a say a /40 of IPv6, /24 of IPv4, and up to 3 AS numbers, your annual fee would be $250. Membership update, so service members now, all service members that have a signed agreement with ARIN and have internet number resources under that agreement become service members. It used to be only ISPs could vote in the ARIN elections, and we kind of thought that, well, you know, there's a lot bigger population out there that is interested in how ARIN does its business than the ISPs. So the first step of that was doing the fee harmonization for ISPs and end users, which we completed in 2022. And the last part of it was this year when we put the ASN only holders into that same registration services plan and made them a service member that can then become a general member should they wish to participate in the governance of ARIN. So that's why it says there, if ARIN's governance is important to your organization, service members can elect to become general members. The general members, the big thing you do is you vote for the advisory council members that shepherd the policies through the process from the community, and also you elect the board of trustees that finalize and accept those policies. Some numbers there. As of February 26, we had 23,367 service members, of which we have 1,972 general members, for a total of 25,339 members. Service members. We also have a little bit over 14,000 14,000 customers that pay no fee. Therefore, they're not a member. They're more commonly known as legacy holders that have not signed an agreement. Oh yeah, there you go. You got it there. Good slides, man. I got to talk to my comms team. They put everything on here. All right, another big thing that happened this year was the expiration of the legacy fee cap. So we're just talking to the gentleman right there about his legacy, his LRSA that he's trying to get signed. He put a ticket in last year. We're still working on it, but he will be eligible for the fee cap. Just to show the difference in that. So if you're an organization with a legacy resource that's not under an agreement, that the annual, if you put it under an agreement to be able to do RPKI and IRR and all the other services, the new services at ARIN, the annual fee would be $4,000 for a /16. Getting it covered under the legacy agreement, the fee will be next year $225, or yeah, this year's $200. Next year will be $225. It goes up $25 a year until you actually reach the tier you're actually at. But to get to $4,000 a year, it's going to take several years to get up to that high. And anybody that has signed a agreement prior to 1 January 2024 has no worries. That is not going away. You will remain under that fee cap for ever, as far as we can tell. Yeah, and like I said, anybody, if you have a ticket pending that was opened in 2023 and we're working on it, a lot of times it has to go to the legal teams for them to request modifications, if and only if you're a state government, you're an institution that's under a state government rules and regulations, we will work with you to modify them to meet your state's requirements. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to John here, and he's going to talk to you about IPv6.
All righty, thank you, John. So the goal here really is to talk about how to determine the right block size of V6 you need to get from ARIN. In the past, we had a lot of folks coming back saying, I got this block size, I went to deploy and it wasn't big enough. So the goal here really is to kind of figure out how to think about V6 the right way and then determine what block size you need from ARIN. Talk about transitioning to V6 thinking. It's very different than V4 thinking. And part of the first thing you need to do is get that into your brain in terms of what's different, how I need to think about V6. Some V6 basics, differences between ISPs and end users in V6, the right block size, how you determine what your maximum size is, how to keep supporting V6, and then sort of putting it all together. What's the plan for moving forward? So V6 thinking, from way back when, those of you who are like me are graybeards, we knew in the mid-90s we were going to run out, right? As soon as we saw, how popular things were becoming. Now, we implemented CIDR, classless interdomain routing. So instead of giving out 3 classes, we gave out a bunch of different sizes. That helped a bit. But our whole mentality was scarcity, right? Those of you who've been requesting from ARIN maybe for a long time, remember, you'd have to go oftentimes multiple times a year, sometimes 6+ times a year. Probably get less than you wanted. I worked as an analyst for a long time, and you'd ask for a lot, and we'd say, well, we only see justification for this much, and you might have to take that, come back and divide into small chunks, right? And so your biggest fear was, well, I got to be at 80%, so ARIN will keep giving me more addresses. So, it's not like you could just take a big giant chunk of addresses and say, all right, that pop's got enough for 5 years. It's like, no, I can only give it enough for 3 months. It can just a little tiny chunk, because you always had to get that 80% to keep getting your addresses to keep running your business. And that mindset really is harmful to V6, right? It's sort of a scarcity mentality of we barely have enough. If you do that in V6, you kind of hamstring yourself. If you think in V6, hey, I only need to get as much as I need right now. You know, gosh, the fees might go up if I get a little bit of a larger block, so I'm just going to get a tiny chunk. That's a risk. Giving customers and sites what they need right now. So we're kind of used to the idea in V4 of, well, a customer wants a certain number of addresses, but I've got to get some sort of, signed and duly stamped thing that says they definitely need all these. Thinking about what the site needs in terms of what does it need now. Well, this is a smaller site, so it needs a small block. This is a bigger site, it needs a bigger block. And adding space. Well, I can just put a smaller block there and add more. All these things are hindering V6 deployment, right? V6 is a protocol of abundance. We have a ton of it. So our goal really is not to stop painting ourselves into corners in terms of, well, let's just give this a /24 and see how it grows, or give this a whatever. In V6, we're coming from a place of abundance. So that starts with getting a block from ARIN, and probably bigger than you think you need. We get people sort of saying, well, a /32 block, oh, that's more than the entire world would ever need. And as you chunk it up, it turns out you go through V6, because we're doing things abundantly, we're giving out chunks that are very large to customers and to sites. So you're going to get a very large block. It might be more than you think. We get people saying, this really just seems way too large. If you're saying it seems too large, you probably did something right. That's good. You're intended to get a lot, so don't worry about size. We're not worrying about conservation. One important thing is we're only using 1/8 of the unicast space of V6 right now. They basically locked up 7/8 of unicast space. So don't worry, even if these policies prove to be a little too lenient, we've got 7/8 to correct. So our worry is not really about being efficient here. So we want to give every customer site a large block. That's one big thing to think about is, gone are the days when we're saying, well, this is a small customer, they only need a /29. This is a big customer, and they need a /24, what have you. You're now going to give every customer and site a very big block, large enough that almost any site will be covered by it. It's okay, right? We're not, for a long time, as long as I've been working for ARIN, this is almost 20 years, we've been going through this thing of, we'll talk about what a /48 block is, but a /48 block is a very big block, and some people say, well, gosh, that's really huge. Why would you give that to a residential customer? We're really not, as long as you want, whatever you want to give to customers in the V6 world is your decision. You can give them a very large block. That's what you're supposed to do. So every customer, every site should get a very large block, enough for maybe the lifetime of its network or the lifetime of the customer's need. And one big principle is every level of the hierarchy use the same block based on the biggest thing in that level of the hierarchy. In other words, if you have 10 wireless towers, we're not saying, well, gosh, this is a small one, that needs this size, this is a big one. We just find the biggest thing at every level of the hierarchy, biggest customer serving site, biggest regional hub or whatever, and give everything that same size. So we have some uniformity. We're not saying, well, my San Jose data center, that's pretty big, but Ashburn, that's kind of small. We just figure out if we have 4 data centers, find the biggest one, give everything that same size. Makes our life easy. It's part of what V6 is about, is not just being bigger, but also making life easier by leveraging that size. In terms of basics, so this is another thing where V4 we kind of know off the top of our head. Somebody says, oh, a /24, you say, oh, okay, that's got 32 IPv4 addresses. Okay, I know I can assign those to devices, like one device, one IP address. /24 is the smallest routable block, so we're kind of used to that. V6, we're not quite as used to it. People still say, well, how many V6 addresses are in a /X? Well, we could tell them, but it turns out the /64 is kind of the smallest thing you're typically going to subnet. The last 64 bits, the 64 least significant bits on the right side of the 128 bits, they're basically all the device has a MAC address. Device will take its MAC address, sort of do some math, throw some additional bits in there, and it comes up with its own last 64 bits. So a /64 subnet is our counting unit, really. We don't really assign anything smaller than that to customers or equipment. They're really just subnets. And the smallest block that ARIN issues to any customer contains 65,000 of those subnets, each of which can hold essentially as many devices as you want to put in there. That's why I say, when we say a /48, something you assign to even a residential customer, it seems enormous, right? And a residential customer gets 65,000 subnets, each of which can have as many. It's almost like giving them a Class B way back when. This is good. And so these are our counting units. This is why we say we don't really count with addresses. So we count by subnets. And so the smallest routable block here has 65,000 of them. And you can see the initial allocation size, right? Of course, way back when it used to be /19 or /20, gone down over the years to where it's now a /24. You can see the typical initial block size, right? A /24 is really not very much. It's only enough for 200 customers, 200 devices. default block size that anyone can get has 65,000 blocks for customers, each of which has 65,000 subnets, each of which holds as many devices as you want to put in there. So that's why the point we say of abundance. We've got a ton of space. You can assign a /48 to a customer. It's fine. Yes, it's a ton of space, but this is designed to make our work easier by saying you can just have a little Pez dispenser that says everybody gets a 48. You're a big customer with a factory, 48. You're a small residential customer, 48. It's enough that everybody can get that size. It's rare that you'll find somebody who needs more than that many subnets. So v6 makes our life easier in that way. So these are kind of the typical block sizes. Doesn't mean this is the only thing you can use. There are some folks who assign a /56 block if they're having residential customers. It's up to you, but you can assign up to a /48 per customer without any additional justification. One thing that's cool about our address structure, we had some folks come by the desk yesterday and sort of saying, gosh, well, v6, it's hard to remember things, and there's so long. One thing that's advantageous, if you design your network the way we're going to talk about it is, remember, these last 64 bits are for device auto-configuration, right? So your device is just going to take its MAC address, do some stuff, and say, just give me the 64 bits preceding, and I'm going to add my chunk on. Just the way this is kind of designed, this is the /32 you get from ARIN. That's your block. The first 2 hextets. As we're designing it, we're talking about assigning a /48 to a customer or to a site. Well, that third hextet there will tell you which specific 48 it is. So we can actually look at an address and say, okay, the first 32, the first 32 bits, that's my block from ARIN. It can vary. We'll talk about the sizes you can get, but a 32 is kind of by default. You can assign a /48 to a customer or site, and then you can know, hey, that site 0234, that's whatever, 123 Jefferson Street or whatever it is. You'll be able to know what site it is you've assigned it to and which subnet at that site is being used. So it's kind of cool. We can go back to, you can think about way back when you got a class A, you could just assign /24s everywhere and there were tons of space. So it's kind of like the good times are here again in terms of having a ton of space. So it's really what you want to do is you don't want to do it like v4 where v4 it's probably hard to look at a block and say I know where that's used. A lot of times you just take it, chunk it up, throw it everywhere. But if we do a nice hierarchical plan, this is kind of what we'll get is a nice addressing plan where when we look at it, it'll make a little more sense because we'll know exactly what site, what part of the network the block's being used in. Talking about ISP versus end user for a second. So before in v4, ISPs were ISPs. Your primary business was selling internet access. So if you were a K through 12, government, I couldn't go to the government, and buy internet access. So we did that, and there really wasn't a big difference in sizes. There was sort of a difference in the way you qualified. ISPs were sort of demonstrated growth. End users were more like how much equipment they had bought. Immediately they needed addresses. But it really didn't make too much difference in the block size. The reason it matters now in v6 is that end users get a block that's 65,000 times smaller than ISPs. It's much, much smaller. So in v6, anyone who assigns space to customers, libraries who assign it to people through Wi-Fi, K through 12 that makes assignments to libraries, or governments that make assignments to libraries or K through 12. So almost anyone running a network where anyone's accessing it, you're assigning addresses to people, you're an ISP. So mostly, there are a few end users, but most networks that provide connectivity that are larger, again, like governments, K through 12, libraries, things like that, even hotels, even though it's not your primary business, I can't go to the Motel 6 and say, I don't want a room, could I just buy some internet from you? But if you provide it along with that, you're going to be an ISP. So generally, I would say applies an ISP. If you really think you're an end user, call up and talk to one of our analysts, but ISP is usually the way to go for most networks of any size. So talking about the right block size. And this is useful, even though there aren't a ton of end users that apply directly to ARIN, this is the same logic you as ISPs would use to determine what your end customers get. For an end customer, the block size is based on just the number of sites in the network. So data centers, offices, warehouses. It's not virtual or remote working places, just places, sites at which you operate. And it's nice, easy back-of-envelope calculation. One site pops out a /48. If you have 2 to 12, you get a /44. The reason we're doing this is nibble boundaries. Every 4 bits is, instead of a byte, it's a nibble. This just makes reverse DNS a little easier. Every nibble has its own reverse DNS delegations. It just means less delegations. And the basic concept here is each site's going to get a /48. So if you need 2, you'll see here, again, we're not like, well, let's give them a 47. It's like, no, guys, we don't want to make this complex. We want to make it easy. We want to give things on nibble-aligned boundaries. So this is the same thing if you were applying to ARIN, or if you have a customer who's an end user who says, hey, I've got 15 offices. well, you would give them a /40 block. That's what they would use. And the idea here is, again, if you have 3 sites, now you have room to grow by 13 without ever adding more space. So this is the formula for kind of determining what an end user gets. In terms of an ISP, so there's just 3 numbers we need to know to determine what your maximum size is. The first is the block size you're going to assign to customers or users. /48 is the industry standard. I kind of mentioned there's been some debate over time of, gosh, that's too much for certain customers. The policy says you're allowed to assign up to a /48. I would encourage you, certainly for the purposes of applying, is to go ahead and say that's what you're going to assign, even if you don't quite need that. Even if you're not necessarily going to do that, it's your advantage to do that. Serving sites in your network, the number of sites at which you operate, you aggregate customer connections. Could be fiber hubs, dorms, buildings, kind of whatever. It's left open because there's so many different types of networks, and the largest number of customers at one of those serving sites. The basic math here is figure out what size to assign. You tell us /48. Again, it's not required. It's not like we come back and take your space back. If you're not doing that, it's just as best you sit here, what you're planning to assign. What site has the largest number of customers? And we want to identify a nibble-aligned block that can hold that many 48s without going over 75% usage. So I've kind of set these up, but if we see we have an example, a wireless tower serves 3,567 customers. Well, we could fit it into a /36. That's got 4,096, except this is V6, not V4. We're not trying to shoehorn them into the smallest block we can. Because that's over 75% usage immediately, you are allowed to assign a /32, or let's say, not assign, this is really about how you qualify, but this gives you credit for a /32 to assign per tower. That gives you a lot of extra space. Remember, the largest one is only 3,500 customers. You have space for 65,000, and all your sites are getting that. So again, this is supposed to be large everywhere. If it looks like it's large, maybe too large, you did things right. So let's talk about then, identify a block that can hold enough for every serving site without going, again, over 75%. So that's sort of the basic logic is nothing should be over 75% immediately. If it is, you bump up to the next nibble boundary. Same type of idea. If I have 13 wireless towers, well, I could fit it into a /28 block. That has 16 /32s. And you can see in V6, we start getting real quick into subnet sizes. We really don't talk about addresses. You can see it's kind of all about how many of whatever size subnet can we fit into what we need. So for 13, again, we could put 13 into 16, that would work, but not a great idea. We're going to immediately need more, so we bump up to a /24, which is the overall block size that's justified. Now, you are not required to get that size block. If you look at it and say, well, gosh, that would increase my fees, you don't have to get that. That's the maximum size you're allowed to request, we're allowed to issue you. So this is a good exercise to do, come up with what you see. Now, that being said, a /32, which is the default, which is what everyone can get if they want, very large. So it's quite possible for your network. You don't need to do this math. This is how it works if you want to get a block size, or even just kind of make sure that a 32 is the right size for you. In terms of supporting V4, so V4 is going to be around for a while. It's funny, I don't work on the phone help desk anymore, but when I used to, we'd sort of get people calling, and then they would sort of say, well, gosh, when are we switching to V6? Like there was just sort of one big master switch, and we just flip it down, and V4 goes away. V4 is not really going away. It's so ubiquitous. You guys might know people are paying a lot of money for V4. You might have heard, back in 2015, ARIN declared full depletion. Well, we are, but there's a thriving market of addresses. Problem there is you might have to pay $50, $60 per IPv4 address. But people are doing that because IPv4 is so ubiquitous and the internet turns out a good way to make money. You have to wait on a waiting list. So we have a waiting list. We get stuff back, like people don't pay their bills. Every once in a while somebody returns space out of the goodness of their heart. We have a waiting list to distribute that. Right now the reality is you're likely to wait 2 to 3 years on the waiting list. Now, if you need space, I would encourage you to do that. Free to go on. But if you're going to go out and buy addresses, as soon as you buy addresses on the transfer market, you get taken off. And it's going to take about 2 to 3 years. Realistically, there might be something that happens. Somebody might return a bunch of space. The policy could change to reduce the number of the maximum block size. But realistically, you're going to wait a few years, most likely. So you got to plan to speak both V4 and V6 for the foreseeable future. Now here's a really cool policy that people don't know a lot about, or at least a lot of our community, a lot of networks don't know about, and that's that the community set aside an entire /10 of V4 space. /10 is 16,384 /24 is what we used to call Class Cs. And they're available very easily. What you basically have to do is you have to come in, you have to get a V6 block. go through all of what I just described, or maybe just say I need a 32. John said that was pretty big. Once you get your V6 block, you can get 1/24 out of this reserve for things like dual stacking infrastructure or translation pools, and get that. And that's basically, you get that for just under ARIN's. The fees we charge are sort of to keep the lights on, send John and John out to Pasadena, fly them back because we don't want them living out there permanently, and stuff like that. So it's actually for as little as $250, you can get an AS number, you can get a V6 block and a V4 block, and have portable addresses. So one big part of our outreach now is talking to underserved networks, rural broadband, wireless ISPs, the Caribbean. A lot of networks that were told, well, you're too small to get your own resources from ARIN. At this point now, any network of really, you don't need to be very big. As long as you're a network that has connectivity, that you're running a network, a business of some sort, you can get your own addresses, your own portable addresses to build your network on your addresses, not a provider's. So this is a great thing to take advantage of. You can get this space immediately. It is not for numbering customers directly. So this is designed to help deploy V6, right? If you're just numbering customers with V4, you're not really helping deploy V6. You're really more hindering it. But the idea is that you have a translation pool. You number customers with V6, and if they need V4 to talk to a V4 endpoint, they just draw one out of a pool. And you can actually request another /24 as frequently as every 6 months if you need more. Let's say you have 10,000 customers you're numbering with V6. Gosh, we're really oversubscribed. You can come in every 6 months and say, I'm really oversubscribed at 60 to 1. I'd like to get it down to more like 6 to 1. Can you give me more? We'll give you more space, and you can keep growing that pool until it's big enough. So, and there's 90% of it still available. It's going to be around for this pace a decade or more. So this is a really great option for anyone who does not already have their own space. And it's a nice little carrot. If you're deploying V6, you can get one of these. And even if you already have V4, as long as you've used up what you already have, you can get space from this. It's sort of treated separately in the waiting list. So really great option for anybody who doesn't have V4 already, who doesn't have their own portable space, or even you might have some but need a little more. So just kind of recapping, first decision is whether you're an ISP or an end user. Really, almost everyone ends up applying as an ISP. I would suggest if ISP doesn't seem right for you, maybe give a call up to the help desk. We'll give some contact info at the end. I would push most folks in the ISP direction. Again, unless you're really sure you're never going to provide any connectivity. Everybody else you apply as an ISP. What we have there is a term for LIR, local internet registry, which is a sense of, well, I'm a network operator, I'm just not an ISP. So a government, K through 12, would be thought of as an LIR, because they're not really a service provider, it's not their primary business, but they are treated like one in policy. Knowing your numbers, very easy. As an end user, just the number of sites. Remember, you kind of have that little chart that tells you what size to give. For this one, don't worry about the formula. We can just tell us block size, again, /48 recommended. Number of serving sites. And remember, we're doing these wide brackets, so it's not like, gosh, I'm not sure if it's 337 or 338. We're really just looking for a general number here. Most of the time it's going to fall within a broad band. It's not really going to matter if we're off 2 or 3. And the number of customers served by the largest site, again, we're not looking for a census level audit, just a back of envelope. Here's how many I believe are served by the largest of those. Out pops the number, and then we can approve your block, and you can get on to deploying V6. In terms of the process, filling out the request, John mentioned we have a help desk. We have some handouts that'll give you a QR code and some instructions for how to create all the records. There's some setup. You got to create a web account, an organization ID, some stuff like that. That pamphlet will tell you how to do it, or of course you can call the help desk. Our analysts will assist you. They're really there to help you guys. So their job is really to say, would you like more? So hopefully we're getting the folks, we've tried to get out of the V4 mentality of, gosh, I'm not sure you need that much. We're really trying to make sure you're getting as much as you possibly are entitled to. Pay the fees. Again, fees start at $250, can go up depending on block size. Sign a RSA. We now do DocuSign, so it's electronic signing. Get your V6 block, get your V4 block as well. So remember to request that. The policy number here in ARIN speak is called NRPM 4.10. NRPM is Number Resource Policy Manual. If you say 4.10, if you say V6 transition space, just make sure, don't use it for directly numbering customers. If you do that, we've had some folks come in and we have to say, I'm sorry, that's not consistent with the policy. But as long as you're doing it for dual stacking your key internal infrastructure, translation pools, things like that, you can come in up to every 6 months and get an additional /24. We issue them sparsely, so hopefully if you come back and get it just a 23, we'll bump your 24 up to a 23. And I should note also for V6, we generally take a reserve for everybody. If you get a /32 of V6, we'll reserve a /28. So in almost all cases, you'll be able to extend your block at least one nibble boundary. So in terms of V6 adoption, we've got some things on the website. We've got some recorded webinars, some business cases. The biggest, I would say, thing people are looking for is, well, I want to deploy V6, how do I do it? And that's kind of a little bit outside of the registry scope, but we do have some blog series, some how-to videos that will kind of talk about folks who actually deployed V6 networks. So kind of some cool resources there. Some challenges to V6 adoption. This is actually taken from a panel we did at an ARIN meeting. And I would say training teams to be aware, educated, and familiar with V6. It really is. ARIN itself, we've had, just making these things we went through in terms of typical block sizes are things you really want to know. You want your team to be able to know. Convincing executive management teams, it's another thing we talk about. People sort of come around our booth and are like, yeah, V6, all right. Or we go to other shows and they're like, why doesn't everybody do it? And it's, well, you got to convince somebody who's on the business side that should spend this money and it makes sense. You are deploying another protocol. That means more stuff to patch. That means more protocols to monitor. So it is realistic, but what we talk about is people are going to need, the government's giving out broadband grants for the next 10 years. What are we going to do with numbering? So I would say, if you want your network to grow, that's what our outreach is, IPv6. You can't really see it, but let's grow is a sort of our theme. Really, if you want to keep growing your network, unless you want to stack up NATs upon NATs, which eventually just doesn't. Most of my ARIN career we spent helping people de-NAT because NAT was bad for latency and tracking users and things like that. It's you got to convince somebody, but I think if you want to keep growing, and really you want to keep the internet growing, which I think we all do, it's really important to support V6. And known unknowns, known knowns, so that old Donald Rumsfeld quote. So these are things that folks who've deployed, and I would suggest, it's actually what I hear mostly from folks, is it's actually easier than they think. When they turn it on, most times you're above 50% native V6 traffic. So, but I think it's really important that we as a community all support V6. When we go out to support tribal entities, governments, rural broadband, these are all new networks who are excited to come onto the internet, but they don't have enough V4 to use everything. So speaking for myself, I think it's important we all adopt V6, not just for ourselves, but so the internet can keep growing. So I'll hand it off back to Mr. Sweeting to kind of talk to you a little bit about some of the upcoming events and wrap it up for us.
Is back on? Yep. Okay, so there's before I go into this, there's a few things I want to go back on and emphasize a little bit with what John said. One of the most frequent questions we've had here as we've been sitting at our help desk there in the exhibit hall is, yeah, but an individual can't get their own IP space, and it's so the answer to that is not simple, but it's pretty easy. If you have a network at your house and you have a commercial upstream providing you with network connectivity, and you want to have your own IP space to number your network at your house, if you're a consultant and you want to do testing and you want to provide services, if you're going to host a website out of your home with several different things you're going to sell or do or all that, you can have your own individual network at your home and be a sole proprietor. The only things you have to follow is if you're in a state where a sole proprietor is required to register their business, then you have to be registered as a business. If you're in a state such as California where that's not required to be a sole proprietor, you just have to tell us you're a sole proprietor and that you have a network from your home, and here's your upstream, and yes, they have agreed that they will announce your block for you. Normally, you'll get if you're getting the V6, you can get a /48 for that, which should be plenty for a home network. I can't imagine anybody needing more, but if you have a good justification for more, then you can bump up to a 44. I don't know. I just can't imagine, but possibly, who knows? You can do a lot of things out of your home these days. I see Owen DeLong isn't in here, but he's somebody. He has I think he has like more than one home network, and he has some providers out of that, and he does V6 only, and he does V4 mixed with V6 and everything, and he is the sole proprietor with ARIN and has his own space. If you want to have multiple providers, so you have redundancy out of your home, and you can get multiple providers. You can get your own AS number, and you can set up BGP with them. You just have to tell us that you want to do BGP with your. You don't have to have you don't have to have two providers. You can have one, and say you want to be doing BGP, so you can get that second provider should you need it, and you'll get that AS number. The other thing was on what John referred to as the NERPM 410 space, which is space that if you have V6 and you're doing V6, you build a V6 only network, but you say you run your own name server or some other service that you're running V6 only and you need people to be able to reach it with V4, you can get that IPv4/24 for that purpose, and that again would be no cost once you have your V6. And you got to have V6 before you can get that block of V4. The only caution that first /24 you get is kind of free of any questions. We just need you to say, you've got some critical infrastructure in your house, you're V6 only, or in your business, whatever, and you want a V4 so you can do some dual stacking of some critical servers, name servers, whatever. Where it comes down to where we really start questioning you and looking is if you try to come back in 6 months later for an additional /24. There's going to be, because the policies around that is you have to be using at least 80% of that first /24 for natting for the most part. Network translation is about the only thing you can use 80% of that /24 for and still get another one. We have a lot of people that come in, they say, oh, I got a server in LA, I got a server in Chicago, I got a server in Dallas, I got a server in New York, and I got multiple discrete networks, and I need 5 /24s of the space. No, those are not multiple discrete networks. Those are sites that you have multiple sites serving services out of multiple sites, but they're not necessarily networks that fall under the definition of multiple discrete network. I believe it's for multiple discrete networks, there has to be a compelling technical reason why you're running two separate networks. So that you'll run into problems if you try to come in and get more than one of those /24s, unless you're really using them in the purpose of the policy. And then I can tell you, most of those second requests, they end up coming to me. As the chief customer officer, I don't do tickets, but those are tickets that are, they're just really too hard for our analysts to make that decision if there's really the reason that the people are providing, if that's really a good reason to give them another 410 space /24. So I just would, I want to just answer those questions, because those are the questions we've been asked the most while we've been here. Yes, individual can hold IPv space and AS number, internet number resources from ARIN. Just got to follow the rules of the state where you're doing your business out of. Oh, and the last thing is, if you're doing it as a sole proprietor, your name would be what shows up in Whois, which is a public registry. But you can also, then if you don't want, and we'll tell you this, if you don't want your name showing up in the Whois query, you can do a DBA. So you can say, I'm doing business as White Elephant, whatever you want that DBA name to be. Again, if your state requires you to register fictitious names for your business as well, then it has to be registered. Most states, well, I won't say most, it's kind of like half and half. Half the states require it, half the states don't. So you just got to know the rules. We follow the rules of your state where you're at. Okay. We got a few more slides left. What's our time? Looks like we're doing pretty good on time. So this is, we're powered by participation. ARIN, it's probably me and John do the most traveling for ARIN to go out and talk to people. I think we did like 46 different outreach events last year. And I think I've been on the road all this year so far. It's like, I'm looking forward to next week when I get a break. Can go down to spring training, watch my Yankees play a few games. But anyway, so the next place we're going to be is in Bridgetown, Barbados. That's a full ARIN meeting. We're going to be in conjunction with Cribnog there. Then we're going to be in Reno at the end of April on an ARIN on the road, and on that same trip we'll hit Reno, and then on the way home we'll stop in Kansas City, Missouri, and then we'll be in an ARIN on the road in Ottawa, Canada in September, and then our ARIN meeting is with NANOG is in Toronto in October. Do we have fellow stuff on here? We're not. So I just want to talk a little bit about our fellowship program. So ARIN has a fellowship program where we, for each one of our main meetings, so that would be the ARIN 53 and 54. 53 is closed out now. We had 16 fellows. 10 of them will get an all-expense paid trip to Barbados with a stipend each day to pay for their food and stuff, and they'll attend the ARIN meeting there, as well as they can stay for the 2 days for the Cribnog meeting as well. The other 6 are virtual participants. We have the program lasts for, I think, 4 weeks. There's 3 virtual sessions where you get to learn about ARIN, what we do, and how the governance of it all, how the policies work, and how they're all developed. And then the 6 that aren't traveling, they will attend the meeting virtually, and the 10 that we're lucky enough to get the paid trip will end up being in Barbados with us for that week. Their hotel's paid, their travel's paid, and they get a stipend to help pay for their food. We will be opening the fellowship for Toronto soon, probably May, June timeframe. And that one also includes attendance at NANOG. We have a special price with NANOG for our fellows. They give us a special discount of, we pay $500 for each one of our fellows to attend NANOG. And again, we pay the airfare and the hotel, and there's a small stipend to help pay for the for your incidentals. So if you're interested in that, you should be watching ARIN and the announcements in our webpage. And then the other thing we wanted to point out is we do have a grant program. I don't see what's network timing protocol. You guys know, big beard, Harlan Sten. Yes, he's had a couple of grants from ARIN to help with his network timing stuff, and I think he's pretty much a fan of ARIN now. We've also had Chris Grunderman has gotten a few grants. He does full control. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but yeah, there's $60,000 put aside in our budget each year, and we'll do grants like for up from $5,000 to $20,000 up to that $60,000 limit. Next cycle on that opens 24 April, and the 4 categories the project must fit into is internet technical improvements, registry processes and improvements, informational outreach that advances the internet, and research related to ARIN's mission and operations. Basically, it's got to be a project that's going to overall help the internet. So with that, we have run out of content, but we're happy to answer any questions. And I think I have to give this. There might not be any. You do a pretty good job at covering our.
Thanks for this talk. As an end user, if I'm asking for an ASN, do I require multiple peering with 2 providers, or can I ask for an ASN with even 1 provider?
You just have to be doing BGP. You don't. The burden of proof is very low right now. You just come in, say you're doing BGP.
For my network, I want an ASN for my network. Period.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Oh, there we go.
Is this the one?
When I look at IPv6 information, it's like books and so on. They're somewhat antiquated. They're like from 10 years ago. Apart from your website, where's the latest information on IPv6?
As far as
What
adoption?
Or no, what the most like one of the things I was told 10 years or so ago about IPv6 is that security is built in. I don't think that's the case anymore. So what I'm worried about is if I read something on if I read a source of IPv6 info, I want to make sure it's up to date, that it's current. That is, if it's out of date, then I don't want to get to that. So where's the latest up-to-date information on or documentation on IPv6? Apart from your website,
It's a broad question. In terms of, I mean, you know, a community like Nanog, I would say, is usually the best way to keep current on things is to network with your other network operators. It's hard for us to say. We're in an era when books almost become out of date when they're published. So I would suggest a community like that would be a good place to find out, hey, where would I learn about? If you post to the Nanog mailing list, there's probably somebody out there. We could give you some, but the people who are operating right now, who know network operation, are the best source. I would recommend just reach out to them and see what's a good source. Because people who are active in the operational community today are your best source of that, I would say.
Okay, well, let me ask a question, just to kind of give an example. In IPv4, there's a private address space, you know, like 192.168. What's the equivalent of that now in IPv6?
I'm trying to make sure it's on. Yeah, so there is something called user local addressing, ULA, and there used to be a thing called ULA Central for v6. It was like, hey, we'll all register our user local addresses and we'll do some math with our AS number. Eventually, I think people just said, well, why would we do that? We're just going back to the era of stuff that's not globally unique. So right now, I think the difference is that we get a lot of people saying, well, it's more difficult because I don't have this private address space, so I know that, oh, that's my internal network, and that can't go outside. What it means now is you don't have to, but most folks use global unique space. You have to have firewalls that know, okay, this is what's internal and what can't go outside, and this is what isn't. So it means you just have to have more knowledgeable firewalls. Is that fair to say?
Same thing you do with your private address on IPv4. You make sure you can't announce that outside your network. So basically, you would, part of your justification, ARIN, would be, I need a /48 or /40 of space to use internally that I don't want to use outside. You just put it into your whole request and what you need. Most people don't use it. Owen DeLong, who's supporting the network here for Scale, he's really a really good expert on IPv4 and the current practices. So if you see him around, you could ask him. But for the most part, the ULA stuff didn't catch on because there's just, people have just you get too much space. You can get, you can just use, and you don't have to worry about collisions if you ever get merged or acquired by somebody. You're definitely using different space if you're using public routable space. You just don't route it, that's all.
Yeah, so on the current information, IEEE is really where you want to go. They run the RFCs. There's a great podcast called IPv6 Buzz. Those guys just love to bring IPv6, and two of them that do the podcast are on the RFC committee. And I was kind of stunned because I'm in the IPv6 project. It's still active. There are still RFCs coming out last week covering IPv6. And they cover all of it. And as I mentioned, they would just tell you do not use that the concept of RFC 1918 you're going to guide yourself wrong. But the question I had is, as an individual, if I wanted to get an IPv6 address, what would be the cost at ARIN?
What would be the cost?
Yeah.
So if you're getting a /48, it's $250 annually.
Annually, okay.
And it would be $250 when you get it. And then if you needed an AS number and the V4 with it, they would come free. And the whole entire cost annually from then on would be $250. You'd be a 3X small. If you got up to a 36, even a 36 is only 3X small right now, but that waiver ends in 2026. You got to go up to a /32 to where it goes up to 500. And
Hi. Hello?
yeah, it's not the best.
So, thanks for this talk. I'm a newbie here. I can't spell IPv6 yet. But I'm thinking about my environment. I mean, I run my business from my home, so I've got my home network. I get my IPv4 that comes from my ISP. I've got my server out there on the internet with a VPS. I get an IPv4 address from the ISP that provides my VPS. Everything seems to be working just fine. Natting is taking care of everything. Is there some point that's going to come along that things are going to break and I need to switch everything over to IPv6?
That's a difficult question, but I can tell you it's probably going to be a long time before that happens. Did you want to answer this question back there?
Servers, network policies, and firewalls, you might care about carrier grade NAT on the client side that you're on. So.
Yeah, does that answer your question? I don't think there's any urgency, but yeah, there are some things you got to keep your eye on as an operator. Are there any other questions? Oh, there you go.
Also for the newbies, what does that ASN you were talking about, what does that do?
Autonomous system number, it groups all the routers within your network into a rule-based network. You set all the rules for your network, for that group of routers, by putting them in an autonomous system.
Okay, so
And then you can use that autonomous system number to set up border protocol gateway, border gateway protocol with everybody else. That's how you exchange routes through BGP
okay,
with
so
an AS number.
ISP or network entity just has one of those.
Yeah, I think if you're an ISP, they have at least one AS number. Yes,
But they could have more.
they could have a lot more.
They could have a lot more. Okay.
Yeah.
One or many.
Yeah, it depends on what they're using them for. Or if they, like, you know, there's, I think the best is, or the one most people know, UUNet had three. They had 701, 702, and 703, US, Asia, and Europe, and they used a different ASN in each region. But yeah, there's people, VeriSign, who does domain name stuff, server stuff. They probably have a couple hundred AS numbers, because for the root servers and all that, they do Anycast, and they need a lot of AS numbers.
Okay, great. And will the slides be available on the Scale website?
Yes, they will.
Okay, great.
Oh, they're up now. Okay, good.
Thank you.
So one other thing that comes to mind, new businesses that are growing in the future, they want to set up a new website. They're not going to be able to get an IPv4 address because they're full or they're expensive, so they set up just an IPv6. Can I reach them from my IPv4 space?
Well, I think if they did it today, they'd say, I need 410/24 of IPv4 space from ARIN to help me deploy my v6 only websites and set up some kind of translation mechanism to be able to have v4 reach their site.
So
That's
everybody
specifically what that space is for.
Okay, so everybody still has to have v4 in order to talk to the rest
Well,
of most
you
of
could
the
set up a
world.
v6 only network and websites, and anybody with v6 could reach it. But if you wanted people with v4 to reach it, then you got to have some way of letting them hit a translator that will get them to your network behind that translation pool.
You would be looking for something like NAT64 or
Yeah.
XLAT 464, and that's usually more handled under firewalls.
Or you could get probably your ISP to provide that service for you as well. Okay, anything else? If nothing else, we will be at our booth there in the exhibit hall for another hour or so before we have to go catch a flight. But I want to thank everybody for inviting us here, and you were a great audience. Thank you very much.